This is a map of the Indian Empire in the late 19th century. What you see is a massive administrative machine. The British carved the subcontinent into enormous, rigid zones, drawn purely for tax extraction and bureaucratic control, completely ignoring centuries of established cultural borders. But if you trace the eastern seaboard, there is a glaring anomaly. The entire region of Odisha is gone. The Odia-speaking territories were chopped up and swallowed by the Bengal, Madras, and central provinces. This administrative fragmentation suffocated the local population. Without a recognized state, local schools were shuttered. The region's traditional cottage industries, like their centuries-old silver filigree and textile weaving, slowly died out from government neglect. The British administration had a strict underlying logic for this. By keeping millions of Odia speakers partitioned as small, powerless minorities in 3 separate provinces, the government effectively neutralized any unified political resistance. This created a devastating paradox. A scattered, marginalized people cannot successfully demand resources or rights from an imperial power. Before they could ask for a state, they first had to prove they existed as a single, unified identity. In the 1860s, a young man from a small village named Gobinda Balav, later known as Madhusudan Das, walked into the center of British power. He navigated Calcutta's elite university system, eventually becoming the very first Odia to earn a BA, an MA, and a law degree. With those credentials, the conventional path was clearly laid out. He was perfectly positioned to stay in the colonial capital, build a highly lucrative legal practice, and live comfortably among the imperial elite. He walked away from it. Das rejected the wealth of Calcutta, packed up his legal practice, and returned to Cuttack to confront the systemic erasure of his people. He understood that simply writing petitions to the British viceroy for a separate state would fail. To force the empire's hand, he had to engineer the structural architecture of a nation from the ground up. His strategy relied on 3 pillars, starting with political unity. In 1903, he founded the Utkal Union Conference, creating a mechanism to give the Odia people collective leverage. His masterstroke was bridging a massive social divide. He traveled endlessly, recruiting wealthy zamindars, powerful feudatory chiefs, and common villagers, forging them into one highly structured, disciplined lobbying bloc. The second pillar was economic independence. Das realized that political sovereignty means nothing if a region cannot financially sustain itself. He aggressively invested his own legal earnings, eventually liquidating his personal fortune to build the Odisha Artware Factory in 1897 and the Utkal Tannery in 1905. He imported modern heavy machinery and began exporting finished shoes to Europe. He even trained alongside his workers, acting as a cobbler himself to master the exact science of leather production. These factories were an economic proof of concept. They demonstrated hard data to the British Empire that a unified Odisha had the industrial capacity to compete in the global market. The final pillar of his strategy was social emancipation. Das argued that an emerging state would structurally collapse if half its population remained legally and educationally restricted. When the only girls' school in Cuttack was on the verge of bankruptcy in 1907, he intervened. He took over its management, installed his adopted daughter as headmistress, and physically secured the infrastructure for women's higher education in the region. He took the fight to the courts, launching a grueling legal battle to dismantle the barriers preventing women, like his protégé Sudhanshu Balahazra, from officially practicing law in India. By establishing these precedents, Das ensured that the demand for a separate Odisha wasn't just a request for a new border. He was integrating social equality into the very DNA of the future province, demonstrating that this region was ready for the responsibilities of modern self-rule. Maintaining these uncompromising standards carried a devastating personal cost. He routinely destroyed factory goods that didn't meet strict quality metrics, absorbing heavy financial losses. Later, as a government minister, he resigned his post entirely rather than accept a salary for public service. The massive capital required to keep these industries and organizations alive eventually exhausted his private wealth. By 1934, the man who had funded the legal and industrial groundwork for the state declared formal insolvency, dying in poverty just as his blueprint reached its final stages. 2 years later, the British Empire finally capitulated to the pressure he had spent a lifetime building. On April 1, 1936, the borders were redrawn. The province of Odisha was officially formed, marking the very first time an Indian state was created explicitly on the basis of a shared language. Madhusudan Das's blueprint worked. He proved that true nation-building requires the systemic, exhausting engineering of an economy, a society, and a unified identity. And it often requires a visionary willing to sacrifice everything for a future they will never live to see.